Have you ever wondered what truly happened during the flood? This well-known biblical story hides secrets that few dare to explore. Among them is a question that intrigues even the most dedicated scholars. Why were some creatures rejected while others were saved? The narrative is not merely about devastating waters and a righteous man building an ark. It's a deep dive into divine justice, the symbolism of creation, and God's choices in preserving life. But here's what you may never have considered. Not all living beings were destined to board the ark. Why? What is the reason behind such an enigmatic decision? Throughout history, we have sought to uncover the details of this extraordinary event. Could it be that the Bible, with its detailed descriptions, points to something beyond the surface? What if there's an even deeper meaning behind God's choices? Perhaps the answer lies in how creation was affected by human sin. It's fascinating to think that every detail of this episode, from the creatures chosen to those left behind, reveals something about God's character and his plan for humanity. More importantly, what does this mean for you today? In this journey, you will discover how God dealt with the earth's corruption, the role of the Nephilim in this chaotic scenario, and how the flood echoes into the New Testament. We'll explore the reasons behind the preservation of marine life, the meticulous selection of terrestrial animals, and what it all teaches us about divine sovereignty. Get ready for a deeper and perhaps controversial perspective on one of Scripture's most iconic episodes. After all, the answers to these questions may transform not only how you understand the Bible, but also God's very purpose for the world. The corruption of humanity in the pre-flood era compels us to reflect on the limits of divine patience and the consequences of human choices. In the biblical narrative, God decides to intervene drastically, revealing his plan to destroy all terrestrial life, except for Noah, his family, and a carefully chosen selection of animals. This decision was not impulsive, but stemmed from profound disappointment in the unrestrained evil dominating the earth. Imagine a world where every thought and action were bent toward wickedness. This was the reality God observed. Here, the biblical account highlights the concepts of righteousness and obedience, with Noah standing as the exception amidst chaos. Could this be an invitation for each of us to examine our attitudes in a world that often seems equally corrupt? Noah's selection was no coincidence. He was a righteous man in his generation, someone who walked with God despite immense adversity. It's intriguing to think that amidst such moral darkness, there was someone who still listened to the Creator's voice. Noah was called to an extraordinary mission, to build a gigantic ark and prepare for an unprecedented event, the flood. Picture the scene, a simple man tasked with constructing something monumental, without any immediate evidence that a catastrophe was imminent. The lesson here is powerful. Sometimes we're called to act on faith, even when everything around us defies logic. An equally fascinating detail is the exclusion of marine animals from destruction. While terrestrial life faced severe judgment, fish and other aquatic creatures continued in their natural habitat, shielded by the very waters that submerge the earth. This point invites a thought-provoking reflection. There are moments when God allows certain elements to remain untouched, even amid chaos. Perhaps this serves as a reminder that even in times of crisis, there are aspects of creation preserved as symbols of continuity and divine mercy. How does this apply to your life? Even amid life's storms, there is something God sustains to bring balance. The mention of the Nephilim adds a layer of mystery to the narrative. These beings, described as giants and the offspring of the sons of God and daughters of men, are often seen as part of the corruption leading to the flood. They symbolize the spiritual and moral disorder that intensified the earth's decay. Though the Bible provides limited details, their existence prompts reflection on the intertwining of sin and creation. This part of the story reminds us that spiritual and moral corruption are deeply connected and have profound consequences. Ultimately, God's decision to reset humanity through Noah and his family is a testament to hope amidst judgment. After the flood, the earth was renewed, and a new covenant was established between God and humankind. This restart reflects divine mercy, which never abandons creation. Interestingly, the New Testament draws parallels, stating that the days of Noah mirror the end times. Jesus warns about the corruption and materialism that will mark humanity's final days, just as they did before the flood. Therefore, Noah's story is not just a historical account, but a timeless warning and an invitation to live righteously and prepare spiritually. The biblical narrative of the flood includes a frequently overlooked but significant detail. While God decreed the destruction of all terrestrial life due to human corruption, aquatic creatures remained unharmed. This seemingly simple point holds deep symbolic meaning. The seas, often representing mystery and vastness, were preserved as a refuge for life amidst the global calamity. Picture the scene. As waters engulfed mountains and devastated the land, marine life continued its natural rhythm. This exception highlights God's sovereignty over creation, reinforcing that not all parts of the world were tainted by human corruption. After all, the oceans and their unique creatures were isolated from direct human influence, serving as a reminder of divine order even in chaos. This detail invites reflection on the significance of water in the Bible. From Genesis, where God's Spirit hovers over the waters, to the New Testament, where baptism symbolizes rebirth, water consistently represents God's presence and power. In the flood, the waters served as agents of destruction for the wicked, but also as tools of preservation and renewal. The survival of marine life reflects this dual symbolism. While humanity faced judgment, the ocean became a realm of stability and continuity. On a practical level, this serves as a reminder that in life's turmoil, God often preserves a part of our existence untouched, a refuge where strength and purpose are renewed. Moreover, the exception for marine life reveals the profound balance within creation. In his wisdom, God recognized that the cycle of oceanic life didn't require interruption, as it was already insulated from human corruption. This preservation teaches that not every crisis demands total destruction. There is always something to salvage, a foundation for rebuilding. In our lives, this serves as a powerful reminder. Even in our hardest trials, God preserves aspects that provide hope for a fresh start. The symbolic significance of marine life continues throughout the Bible. In Job, for instance, the Leviathan represents God's power and mystery. In the New Testament, Jesus calming the storm demonstrates his control over the waters and his ability to bring peace amidst chaos. The preservation of marine life during the flood symbolizes God's constancy and presence, even in the darkest times. How can we recognize and trust God in the areas of our lives that remain under control while others face turbulence? Finally, God's decision to spare marine creatures highlights his precise and purposeful judgment. It shows that even amid calamity, he acts with mercy and intention. Just as God preserved the seas during the flood, he preserves areas of our lives with potential to thrive. Which brings us to the next question. If God was so meticulous in protecting marine life, how did he demonstrate care in selecting terrestrial animals for the ark? The story of Noah's Ark is undoubtedly one of the most fascinating in the Bible, and one of its most intriguing elements is the selection of terrestrial animals and birds to be saved. God instructed Noah to bring a pair of each species, ensuring the survival of biodiversity after the flood. Furthermore, there was a clear distinction between clean and unclean animals, with the clean ones being brought in greater numbers. This seemingly technical distinction carries profound symbolism that resonates throughout the biblical narrative. The clean animals, later associated with sacrifices and sustenance, were essential for the continuation of worship and human survival post-flood. Imagine the responsibility Noah had in identifying, gathering, and caring for these creatures. It wasn't just an impressive logistical feat, but also a testament to divine order and care. The selection of terrestrial animals and birds highlights Noah's role as a co-author in God's plan of preservation. God could have simply recreated the animals after the flood, but he chose to work with Noah to safeguard what he had already created. This partnership reminds us that we are often called to collaborate with God in his plans, even when the task seems impossible. Building the ark was already a colossal challenge. Now Noah faced the mission of accommodating and feeding thousands of species during months of isolation. Think about it. The patience and diligence required to fulfill this monumental task weren't merely natural traits of Noah. They were demonstrations of his faith and obedience. How often does God entrust us with tasks that seem beyond our capabilities, only to reveal that with him, we are more than able? One often overlooked detail is the environment inside the ark. Imagine the noise, the smells, and the constant need for feeding and cleaning. The logistics of caring for so many animals in a confined space are almost unimaginable. Yet the Bible shows that God gave Noah detailed instructions, including the ark's dimensions and how it should be built, indicating that the divine plan includes even the smallest details. This is a practical reminder for us. God doesn't give us tasks without equipping us with the necessary resources. Whether we're facing spiritual, financial, or relational challenges, he always provides guidance, even when the path seems overwhelming. The preservation of terrestrial animals also points to God's intention to renew life after the flood. The ark wasn't just a vessel for survival. It was a microcosm of the future world, a reminder that God's plans include restoration and flourishing. By preserving each species, God demonstrated his commitment to creation and his desire for life to continue and thrive. This is a powerful message for us today. Even in the midst of judgment or hardship, God's ultimate goal is renewal and restoration. Finally, the selection of animals underscores the intricacy of God's care and the balance of creation. It challenges us to think about our role as stewards of the earth and the resources entrusted to us. Just as Noah was called to preserve and care for creation, we are invited to consider how we honor God's trust in our daily lives. Which leads us to another mystery: the Nephilim and their connection to the corruption of the pre-flood world. The Nephilim are undoubtedly one of the most enigmatic figures mentioned in the pre-flood biblical narrative. Cited in Genesis 6, these mysterious beings are described as giants, the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. This description sparks numerous interpretations and theological debates, but one thing is clear: their existence is closely tied to the corruption and moral decline that preceded the flood. It's fascinating to imagine how the interaction between the spiritual and human worlds resulted in such a profound influence on the earth. The presence of the Nephilim symbolizes the devastating impact of sin and the disorder that emerges when creation veers away from God's original purpose. Beyond their imposing figure, the Nephilim represent the corruption of established order. Some scholars suggest that their strength and physical stature made them figures of power and domination, contributing to the violence and anarchy that characterized humanity at the time. This widespread corruption was more than moral. It was structural, affecting every aspect of life on Earth. Picture a world where the most powerful individuals didn't merely neglect justice, but actively perpetuated oppression and destruction. This scenario serves as a warning for modern times, illustrating how unchecked power and a lack of spiritual values can lead a society to ruin. The phrase, "sons of God, who united with the daughters of men," is another point of significant debate. Interpretations range from fallen angels to descendants of Seth, or even powerful human rulers. Regardless of interpretation, the central message remains. There was a transgression of divine order, a crossing of boundaries set by God. This episode teaches us about the dangers of disregarding spiritual and ethical boundaries established by God. Reflect on this. How often are we tempted to cross boundaries in pursuit of power, pleasure, or recognition, only to face the consequences of unchecked desires? The Nephilim also play a key role in understanding the divine judgment of the flood. Their existence was a tangible representation of the depth of corruption and disorder that had overtaken the world. God not only observed humanity's widespread wickedness, but also the profound impact this corruption had on natural and spiritual systems. The destruction of the Nephilim in the flood symbolizes the restoration of divine order and the eradication of all that opposed God's original plan. Although shrouded in mystery, the story of the Nephilim compels us to consider the spiritual forces at work in our world. While the Nephilim perished in the flood, the lessons from their existence are timeless. They remind us of the ongoing struggle between good and evil, between divine order and rebellion. And speaking of spiritual battles, the biblical story offers fascinating parallels in the New Testament, where Jesus directly confronts the forces of darkness. How do these parallels between the flood and Christ's teachings reveal the unchanging nature of God's plan? Let's explore this further. The story of the flood and its surrounding events is not merely an isolated account in the Old Testament. It powerfully echoes in the New Testament, revealing profound connections between divine judgment and the redemption offered through Jesus Christ. In Matthew 24:37-39, Jesus directly parallels the days of Noah with the time preceding his second coming. He describes a scene of materialism and disregard for spirituality, where people lived their lives as if nothing was amiss, until the flood suddenly overwhelmed them. This warning is not merely a prophecy, but also an invitation to spiritual vigilance. Just as in Noah's time, we are challenged to remain alert and focused on God, even in a world that seems to disregard spiritual truths. Jesus' sacrifice in the New Testament can be seen as a redemptive counterpart to the judgment of the flood. While the floodwaters cleansed the earth of evil, Christ's blood was shed to cleanse humanity of sin. Both events signify a fresh start, but with distinct differences. The flood brought destruction to eliminate wickedness, while the cross brought restoration to reconcile humanity with God. This contrast underscores God's mercy and love, which, despite his justice, continually seeks to save. Imagine the depth of this connection. The flood reminds us of sin's cost, while the cross reveals the price of salvation. These two events are interconnected by a crimson thread that weaves through the entire Bible. Another link is the role of Noah as a forerunner of Christ. Just as Noah was chosen to save his family and the animals from impending destruction, Jesus came to save all of humanity from eternal condemnation. Noah, with his faith and obedience, built the ark as a refuge against divine judgment. Similarly, Jesus, through his obedience unto death, became the spiritual ark in which we find safety and eternal life. This invites us to reflect. Are we living with the same faith and obedience displayed by Noah and Jesus? Are we stepping into the ark Christ provides, or are we ignoring God's call? The flood also serves as a symbol of Christian baptism in the New Testament. In 1 Peter 3:20-21, the Apostle Peter compares the waters of the flood to the waters of baptism, explaining that baptism is not merely an external cleansing, but a commitment to a clear conscience before God. Just as the flood waters saved Noah and his family, baptism signifies salvation and spiritual renewal. This analogy encourages us to view baptism not as an empty ritual, but as a profound declaration of faith and a new beginning in Christ. It reminds us that just as Noah emerged into a renewed covenant with God, we too are called into a transformed life through baptism. Finally, Jesus' warning about the days of Noah is not only a prophecy, but also a call to action. He highlights the spiritual indifference and materialism that marked that era, which also characterize our times. While many live as though tomorrow is guaranteed, Jesus challenges us to live with purpose and preparedness, knowing that his return is certain. This reflection leads us to the next point: how Noah, through his unwavering obedience, serves as an enduring example for those who seek to follow God in a world rife with corruption. Noah as an example of faith. Noah stands as a profound example of unwavering faith and obedience amidst a generation steeped in corruption. While humanity around him lived in rebellion, he distinguished himself as a man who walked with God. This phrase, "walked with God," is not merely a narrative detail, but a testament to a life deeply aligned with God's will. Imagine the societal pressures Noah faced as he followed instructions that seemed nonsensical, constructing a massive ark, warning of impending judgment, and enduring ridicule from those around him. He didn't just hear God's voice, he acted on it, even when it defied human logic. This timeless lesson of courage and perseverance is especially relevant in a world that often rejects spiritual values. What makes Noah even more remarkable is his meticulous obedience. The Bible clearly states that Noah did everything exactly as God commanded, from constructing the ark to caring for the animals. This level of precision reflects a trust in God that surpasses human understanding. Too often, we are tempted to question or modify God's instructions to fit our preferences. Noah, however, followed every detail, trusting that God knew best. Reflecting on this, we are challenged to ask, are we willing to obey completely, even when we don't fully understand the plan? Noah's story invites us to examine our own willingness to surrender fully to God's will. Noah's resilience, both emotionally and spiritually, is another key takeaway. He spent decades building the ark, enduring the scorn of his contemporaries and shouldering the weight of a monumental task. His perseverance reminds us that faith is not a one-time event, but a lifelong commitment. Noah's life teaches us that obedience to God requires patience and determination, even when results are not immediately visible. For anyone facing similar challenges, Noah's story offers powerful encouragement. Every small act of faith contributes to the fulfillment of God's purpose. What might God be asking of you today that requires persistence and trust? Noah's faith also had a direct impact on his family. Not only did he save himself, but he also ensured the survival of his wife, sons, and daughters-in-law. This underscores the importance of spiritual leadership within our families. Noah led by example, and his family followed his guidance, entering the ark and being spared from judgment. This challenges us to consider our role as spiritual leaders. Are we living in a way that inspires those around us to follow God? Like Noah, we are called to be a light in times of darkness, guiding our families and communities with faith and integrity. Ultimately, Noah's story is a testament to the transformative power of faith. His life demonstrates that even in a world consumed by corruption, it is possible to live righteously and be used by God to fulfill his purposes. Noah's obedience and faith not only saved his family, but also laid the foundation for future generations. This leads to a compelling question. How was the world redefined after the flood? And what lessons does God leave us with in this divine reset? The flood was not merely an act of purification. It marked a pivotal moment in humanity's history, when God established a new beginning. After the waters receded, the earth emerged as a renewed canvas, brimming with possibilities and promises. Noah and his family were tasked with repopulating the world, bearing the lessons of a judgment that had reshaped human history. In this fresh start, God made a covenant with humanity, symbolized by the rainbow, promising never again to destroy the earth with a flood. This promise was more than a gesture of mercy. It was an invitation to responsibility. Just as Noah was entrusted with caring for a renewed world, we are called to steward wisely the resources God has placed in our hands. The post-flood era introduced a new order in humanity's relationship with animals and creation. Before the flood, humans were essentially vegetarian, but afterward God permitted the consumption of meat, albeit with specific restrictions. This shift reflects the adaptation required for survival in a changed world. It's fascinating to see how God continues to provide for his creation, adjusting conditions to fit new realities. This divine provision reminds us that God cares not only for our spiritual needs, but also for our physical well-being, equipping us to thrive even in challenging circumstances. Humanity was also reminded of the sanctity of life and the need to respect creation. God declared that blood represents life, emphasizing the sacredness of every living being. This principle resonates throughout the Bible, culminating in Jesus Christ's sacrifice, where his blood was shed to redeem humanity. In the post-flood context, this emphasis on the value of life laid the foundation for a more just and mindful society. How can we demonstrate respect for life in our daily choices, from the way we treat others to our care for the environment? The rainbow, a symbol of the covenant, is one of the most powerful elements of this narrative. Every time we see it in the sky, we are reminded of God's mercy and faithfulness to keep his promises. This visual symbol transcends generations, connecting us to the same assurance given to Noah. It's remarkable how something so simple can hold such profound meaning. In our lives, the rainbow serves as a reminder that even in the darkest times, God continues to offer hope and renewal. How can this assurance encourage us to trust him more deeply? Finally, the post-flood redefinition was not only physical, but also spiritual. God called humanity to live righteously, leaving behind the corruption that had led to judgment. Noah and his family represented this call, symbolizing the opportunity to begin anew under divine guidance. Yet the question remains, how did humanity respond to this call? The post-flood story prepares us to explore the ongoing interactions between God and humanity and the lessons we learn from their triumphs and failures. The story of Noah's Ark and the flood is not just a tale of the past. It is a mirror reflecting our own faith journey and choices. Every detail, from God's decision to destroy and rebuild to the animals saved and those left behind, teaches those profound truths about justice, mercy, and purpose. But here's the critical question: how are you responding to the challenges God places before you? Are you, like Noah, building your ark, faithfully following divine instructions? Or are you ignoring the warnings, distracted by the noise of the world? What stands out most in this narrative is God's attention to detail. He didn't just preserve life, he established a new covenant, symbolized by the rainbow as an eternal reminder of his faithfulness. Now think about this. What is God preserving in your life today? What storms is he allowing to shape you? And what arcs is he calling you to build? These questions may feel challenging, but they carry a promise. Even in the darkest moments, God's plan is full of hope and purpose. Here's the challenge. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you remain a passive observer, or will you step up and respond to God's call? Perhaps it's time to reevaluate your priorities, dedicate more time to reading the Bible, engage in acts of faith, and strengthen your relationship with God. Why not start today? Pray for direction, take that first step, and begin building something of eternal significance. If this story has touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this message with someone who needs to hear about God's faithfulness. The journey doesn't end here. There is so much more to learn, discover, and live out. Are you ready for the next step?